time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, Ms. Schroeder. It's time for Newt Gingrich and George McGovern to ascend the altar and go at each other. And Mr. Gingrich will start by asking questions of Mr. McGovern.
Well, I think that the question becomes two big issues at the end of the 80s. Let me start with the question, George. If we are going to focus reform efforts on the next 3 or 4 years, if we are going to focus an effort on reform, are we in greater difficulty in the marketplace economy, and do we need to focus on the marketplace economy, or are we in greater difficulty in the breakdown of the unionized bureaucracies of the liberal welfare state and the whole structure in places like New York City of a system that is simply failing to work? Where would you focus more to reform? Which is failing worse, the marketplace or the welfare state?
Congressman, I wish we could get away from the distinction that Dr. Kirkpatrick drew here a while ago, where she wanted us all to say which is the most evil, the federal government or the private market economy. I don't think that either one of them are necessarily evil. I think they both perform an absolutely essential role in our lives. So I'm not going to answer your question as to where I'd begin a reform effort. I'd start with both of them.
Let me try it differently for a second. I think it's very important to define America in the 90s. As we try to compete with Japan and Korea and Germany, are we more hindered by the marketplace, or are we more hindered by large government-dominated bureaucracies which work less and less well? Let me give you a quick example. If you're an immigrant to America and you think of yourself as not yet rich, but you don't think of yourself as poor and on welfare, the odds are very good that your children will graduate very high in their class, that you earn a great deal of money, and that you'll be middle class or above within 5 years of arriving here. If, on the other hand, you arrive here and you think you're poor, and you end up going into the welfare system, the odds are very good you will learn habits which guarantee you're not going to succeed in the American system.
What's the question?
My question is simple. Is it the marketplace at that point which is failing those people who aren't rising, or is it in fact a welfare state which has structured an environment where people are simply being trained into avoiding success?
I think that there are deficiencies and also virtues in both the private market in this country and also in our government programs. And I refuse to be drawn into this question of which is the greater evil of the two. I think we have serious enough problems that we need to try to figure out how the government can work more effectively, and how industry can work more effectively, and private capital can work more effectively in addressing our common problems. And that's, I think, for example, that you folks have stressed here tonight the great virtues of the increase in freedom over the last 8 years during the Reagan years. You've talked about the decrease in government regulation. But the results aren't quite as attractive as you've painted them to be. And maybe now that the time has come for me to direct some questions here, I should ask you, is it my turn?
No, not yet.
All right.
Let's throw out some statistics anyway. If you've got them.
I think we make a big mistake in singling out either the government or our private market as the culprit. I'm sure that the late Senator Jim Eastland is turning in his grave tonight when he heard Bill Buckley say that the whole federal farm price support program is a national scandal. Now, there may be, there are some problems with the federal farm program. It's not perfect. Neither is the private farm market perfect. There are some things that are wrong with the rural electrification program, but I don't think we ought to abandon it. I think we ought to try to improve it. And across the board, this is the point I've tried to make here tonight, that we have a mixed economy in this country, where there's some useful things that are performed by the government and some by the private market, but they don't necessarily have to be enemies of each other.
Let me try one more time, and let me get away from the word evil, which I've not used and don't intend to use,
well, it's been used a lot here
and
tonight.
ask the question in the context of my good friend Jack Kemp. We are experimenting on our side, on the Republican side, with bringing values of freedom to public housing. we are encouraging people to take over and run their own housing project, to think of themselves as citizens and not just clients, to extend the power of the marketplace and the competitiveness of the marketplace right into the heart of public housing. Now, that's clearly antithetical to the liberal welfare state bureaucratic model. My question is it a good thing that we are bringing those values to public housing, or is it destructive to deprive the bureaucrats
all right,
of
answer that question, then throw them at him.
Absolutely flabbergasted that you would bring up that example, Congressman, of the great progress you've made the last 8 years in how you handle the housing issue in this country. It's not Congressman Kemp's fault, but he presides over that agency now, and he's inherited a mess partly because it lost its regulatory energy and force, and your so-called free marketeers came in and ripped off the program. They ignored the needs for housing. They ignored the needs of the poor and the middle class. And if your experiment, as you call it, with the free market in the housing industry tells us anything, it tells us the need for some degree of regulation and government supervision to see that we don't get ripped off by these unscrupulous free marketeers.
Go ahead and ask some questions.
All right, I'd like to follow Professor Galbraith's example and try to get down to what's actually happened rather than pure theory. We were told at the beginning of the last administration that if we could do away with government regulations and get the government off our backs, all of us would do better. Did that happen in the field of the environment when the Environmental Protection Agency weakened its regulations over protecting the air and the water? What happened with regard to the tanker that went aground off Alaska? What's happened on the toxic waste front? What progress have we made in producing nuclear power without contaminating the plants where it's produced? Is your formula for less regulation actually giving us a better and safer environment?
Now, let me start and say that I want to go back for just 1 second on the housing. I was specifically citing Jack Kemp and talking about a very real program to help poor people. And I think that...
but now answer the question.
And I'm now going to answer this question. But I just want to make that point again, because I think that the overall development, and a good example is Shoreham, where we have a big debate right now, and Governor Cuomo would close down a nuclear power plant in a circumstance where it is now being proven there will be more damage to the environment, more waste put into the environment, more damage done to the greenhouse effect, and more people probably killed by the cost of production of electricity and of coal, etc., by closing down Shoreham, which is a nuclear power plant, and replacing it with fossil-burning fuels. And in fact, what Governor Cuomo's answer is very simple. He is going to externalize onto all of the taxpayers of all of America the $6 billion cost of his decision to guarantee either brownouts in Long Island or a dramatically greater amount of pollution. I happen to think that we are better off to be honest up front about the cost of having a healthy environment and to be honest up front about the technology available, which is why I think that George Bush has been right to introduce a comprehensive Clean Air Act, which I think is a major step in the right direction.
It involves more government regulation, more government effort. But let me go
on.
I
never objected to a refereed-free economy. I said we won. That fight was ended.
We're getting closer together here. Let me ask you this question. You've talked about the effort in the direction of a free market over the last 8 years. To whatever extent that effort has been made, why is it that during those 8 years our international trade deficit has skyrocketed to the highest point in history? Why is it that our domestic fiscal deficits have been running over the last 8 or 10 years at $150 and $200 billion a year? What have been the virtues of this movement over the last 8 years to reduce regulation and public standards in terms of those problems of rising trade deficits and rising domestic deficits?
Let me say, first of all, that I am fascinated to hear both you and Congresswoman Schroeder passionately argue that we were worse off today than we were under Jimmy Carter at 23% interest rates and 13% inflation. I think it's very, very hard to argue that 1989 is worse than 1979 for the overwhelming majority of Americans. Second,
It is
We
worse
have,
on
we,
the deficit and the
but,
trade
but second, we have created vastly more jobs. We have a much larger economy. We've had the longest period of increased productivity and prosperity in American peacetime history. And third, I would just suggest to you that the problem in Washington, this is the fundamental difference between these two tables. You think the problem in Washington is that America is undertaxed. We think the problem is the federal government is overspent.
Thank you. Okay. Jack Kemp and Gary Hart. And let's see, Mr. Kemp will question Mr. Hart to begin with.
Gary, we talked earlier about industrial policy, and you mentioned that your industrial policy was to open up markets, and we debated for a moment the trade balance and exports. So I would just like to make a point as a postscript to what we were talking about, and that is this. Our economy has begun to grow. Most people give us some recognition for the macroeconomic recovery. I admit that there are pockets of poverty, that there are ghettos and barrios in America that are hurting, both rural and urban, and I've spent some time recently in those communities, and I think there are things that we can do. But the point that I would like to make is that if we go to the policies advocated by yourself and generally by your party, tax rates would have been higher, there would have been more regulation, there would have been less reliance on the market economy, and very frankly, we would have put up protectionist barriers against trade that would have fed big business, and I want to stand here in defense of entrepreneurial capitalism, which is the little guy and the little gal getting big, not relying on subsidies and trickle-down economics to General Motors or Chrysler or any company. So what is it about industrial policy that is so seductive to your party that would make it turn towards the European model?
First of all, it's always a pleasure because I never have to answer any questions. I just listen to Jack. First of all, let me correct an oversight on my own part. I just want to take 1 second to say my own word of thanks to the University of Mississippi and the wonderful people of Oxford and to Mr. Buckley for making this possible. I think, Jack, you and I have known each other long enough, you know me well enough to know that I don't attempt to speak for the Democratic Party, never did. I have my own views. I've tried to make some of those views acceptable in the party, and I haven't had a lot of success in those cases. I didn't have a particular industrial policy as such. I thought there were reasons why this country was falling behind in the trade competition, and that together the private sector and the government ought to address those reasons. For one thing, shift investment away from debt to equity. For one thing, shift investment towards new technology, research, and development. Reward those activities. Now, the government's been doing that for 50 or 100 or 150 or 200 years, as Congressman Gingrich told us. There is nothing wrong with that. Indeed, in fact, after listening to almost all points of view here, I think the only person who comes even close to being anything like a free trader is Mr. Buckley himself. He does, in fact, have kind of the integrity. No, Jack, no. You have made, well, so am I, but I'm talking about free markets. You have made your concessions, as all of us have, as politicians. Mr. Buckley is free to espouse a more purist point of view, and I respect and honor him for that. Very few people like that around. In any case, the issue here isn't the evil of socialism, whatever Mr. Gingrich said, or the wonders of the free market. The issue is the fine gray area in between and how we as a country today can in fact compete with the Japanese and others. We've got to train our workers better. I think the private sector ought to do that, would be encouraged to do it.
Well,
a lot of other things, research and the other things.
We talk so much about Japan, and it seems to me in Japan, when a couple gets married, they live with their parents. And then when they get to be 40 or so, they get to move into their first apartment. And then they get to be 50 or more, and they get to buy their first home. They have to put 10 times their income down on a down payment. Here in the United States, with all our faults, we have an FHA finance, and I support that bill. I'm not such a purist that I don't think FHA should be a strong supporter of home ownership in America. But Frank, well, the point is, it has to be suggested to people that, as far as I'm concerned it does, that Japan is not a model for the United States. The United States is the model for Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the rest of the world.
The question is, aren't you completely wrong?
I've never advocated accepting Japan as the model for this country. I think it'd be a disaster. If that's your question.
You decry our debt that
the
is
fact
built.
we're falling behind
Well,
in the world competition for
listen,
markets.
Every major new computer in the world almost is being made in the United States. Tom Peters on PBS the other evening celebrated the fact that Compaq and Sun Microchip and Apple are competing against IBM, that Nordstrom's and Benetton and all of the young growing retail stores are competing against the big guys. We've got now 32 automobile companies in the global economy competing with each other. We live in a world in which we've got to be competitive, and I would suggest that rather than go for an IRA account, with all due respect, as important as those are, we ought to cut capital gains. We ought to eliminate it in the ghetto and the barrio to get more entrepreneurship among our minorities.
Okay.
There are answers.
All right, we
but it's not
can't
serving
wait
the
for a
government.
question there. Just start asking questions yourself, Senator.
Well, I can hardly wait to start asking questions because I want to hear what Mr. Kemp thinks. Jack,
Glad you're smiling.
are you are you in favor of bailing out the savings and loans?
They were bailed out. That is a policy that was prescribed by
Are you in
both the
favor of
Bush
bailing out?
administration. The answer is yes. I think we have an obligation to protect the thrifts of this country and the depositors.
Is that a free market?
But it is
that
not
a
a free
free
market. And aren't we past the point at which we were talking about either laissez-faire or socialism? As far as I'm concerned, we could have done it a lot better had we given more thought to the type of policies that sent interest rates so high that put the thrifts in the problem in the first place. As far as I am concerned, stabilizing the dollar, making savings more attractive, cutting capital gains tax, eliminating the ghetto, that we would have a much better savings rate than we would if we continue to rely on government savings.
Your party had the White House for 10 years before this happened. Why didn't you do those things?
Well, I would suggest that the thrift problem did not occur because of deregulation, that it was occurring because of some of the problems that began in the late 70s when you had interest rates go to 21% and inflation at 13%, and they were borrowing.
Poor Jimmy Carter.
Well,
all right.
it's, whether you like it or not.
One of these years, these chickens are going to come home to roost in your party.
Well, let me ask you a question then.
No, I'm
Which
asking you a
chicken?
question. Let me ask you this. Several years ago, your party began the deregulation of the airlines. Are you prepared to say tonight,
I defend
after that deregulation, that airline travel is safer,
Yes.
cheaper,
Yes.
or more comfortable?
Yes. More people. Look,
No,
it's
that's not what
perfect.
I asked you.
Well,
Is it
what-
safer?
Yes.
It's safer.
Yeah, per passenger mile, airline travel in the United States per passenger mile is safer today, A. B, more people are traveling by airlines than ever before. And we have the great defender of the middle class. There are more poor people, more students, more middle class, more people flying from coast to coast and from the United States to Europe and Asia than ever before in the history of the world. It is not perfect, but it's awfully much better than what it was. And I'll also say that deregulating oil and gas was the right thing to do because the price did not go up as McGovern and Galbraith said it would. It went down so much down that it's caused problems.
I'm sure the airlines appreciate
there,
the commercial.
Gotcha.
You didn't answer the question.
Oh, I didn't?
Nevertheless, we know that more people are flying on airlines today. Do you think there ought to be any rules in the market for violation of rules of competition
Yes.
or violation of principles
Sure
of
do.
competition? You do.
Right. I
You're
agree
for
with
this.
what Newt said. We need a referee. We need an official. We need umpires. And as an old pro football player, I respect that the rules of the game should be level and fair for both sides. But you kind of get the feeling sometimes that the government is the other team and that they're winning. And that the more you work, the less you get to keep and the less you get to save. So that's what I object to.
But again, I'm trying to figure out which government that is, whether it's the one your party has
I'll
been
show you
running.
what government it is. Michael, grab this.
That would violate my objectivity. Well, all right.
Schroeder, this is the process to build a home in Southern California. This is the home down there and that's the 600 or 700 layers of bureaucracy that a developer has to go through to build a home in Southern California. That adds $30,000 to $40,000 to the cost of an affordable home for your sons and daughters, at least those in Southern California.
This is the state and local government Mr. Buckley was praising,
Well,
I
I'm
believe, a little
suggesting,
earlier.
folks, that when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about government bureaucracy, government regulations, zoning, exclusivity, rent controls that have been defended by John Kenneth Galbraith for years. I want to remove that level of bureaucracy and get America back to a housing policy that can build houses for the poor, and those first-time home buyers. Thank you, Michael.
Well, anytime.
Appreciate your...
You got another question?
That will teach Pat Schroeder to put up a picture of Newt Gingrich.
Yeah. I'm sure President Carter was very busy putting all those regulations into effect someplace.
We're just talking about regulations, Gary.
So you are in favor of the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act that regulate
I
corporate
favor
finance?
antitrust laws. I
You think
favor
they should be enforced?
competition. I favor Social
But is that
Security.
free market?
But I'll tell you this,
Are those-
folks, if it hadn't been for the
Congressman-
recovery, we wouldn't have a Social Security
Now,
system that's sound.
Congressman, the question is, should the government enforce the antitrust laws if there is a violation of
Absolutely.
competitive
You bet.
principles?
All right.
Right.
Thank you very much, both of you. You both asked and answered the question. We've come to the time for final arguments. Senator McGovern, if you would like to make the final argument to speak against the resolution tonight.
I want to take just a minute to express my appreciation and the appreciation of my colleagues to Bill Buckley and to Firing Line for making this debate possible. Bill is usually wrong, but he presents his positions with such style and wit that I've learned to appreciate him. He's wrong, but he's not evil. He is, as Thackeray said, guilty only of the mischief which the very virtuous do. And I want to thank the people of Ole Miss and the people of this state for their hospitality to all of us. The people of this state of Mississippi remind me of the people of my own state of South Dakota, warm and wonderful people, but sometimes wrong in their voting behavior. Now, on our here tonight on this theme of free market competitiveness, we've had 8 free Americans arguing in the competition of free ideas. On our side, we have contended that free market competition is fine. It's not evil. It's an important part of the growth and greatness of the United States. But it also falls short of some of the things that have to be done in a society such as ours. The education of our children, the protection of our environment, to name only 2. And we have argued further that there needs to be some safeguard and protection against uncontrolled free market activity. Justice Holmes reminded us years ago that freedom of speech does not include the right to falsely shout fire in a crowded theater. By the same reasoning, the free market should not include the freedom to pollute our environment. It should not include the freedom to exploit our workers. It should not include the freedom to neglect the hunger and the loneliness of children and the aging poor. Free enterprise should not include the right to operate airlines unsafely or to operate oil tankers recklessly. So, as I said at the beginning, competitive free enterprise, yes, but with an intelligent and practical role by this great democratic government of ours to see that the public interest is protected.
Mr. Buckley.
I join the chorus that wishes to thank you for your hospitality, Chancellor Turner in particular. I thank Senator McGovern for his charming, if emasculating generosity. We have attempted in our hectic arrangement to identify what it is that we approve and what it is that we disapprove. I disapprove, as do my colleagues, the tendency of government to get in the way as it increasingly does. During the past 20 years, it has gotten to spend 10% more of the gross national product than it used to do. Inevitably, we point to problems that are created by government itself. We pointed to the S&Ls, or what would have been the problem of S&Ls if there hadn't been a government guarantee? What would have been the problem of HUD if HUD hadn't been a federal agency? As regards the contaminants, if we were serious about contamination, the first thing we would do is close down our coal industry. Our coal industry is by far the principal contaminant, but why can we not do that? Because we can't get the federal government to license nuclear power, notwithstanding that nobody's ever been killed by nuclear power, and that there's a massed Luddite apprehension over nuclear power. No, the problem is that of a frame of mind. During the past 10 or 12 years, it has substantially changed. If we had pursued in the direction in which we were so hotly headed 10 or 12 years ago, we would not have had that sustained period of growth acclaimed by Mr. Camp. We were told that this was a government oriented for the rich, and yet the rich are paying far higher taxes now than they were 10 years ago. I'm reminded of the lady who in 1964 came back having voted and was asked by her neighbor, well, did you vote for Barry Goldwater? She said, no, I didn't. Why? Well, you're a Republican. Well, she said, I'm afraid that if I vote for him, he's going to take away my TV. No, not your TV. It's TVA he was talking about. Well, she said, that's very reassuring, but I'm not going to take any chances. It is that kind of misdirection by which it is assumed that we are in favor of hunger and contamination and social insecurity when we look at these programs and ask, are they heading in the right direction, and are they inspired by the dream of freedom and competition? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, our debate is now over. I could tell you who won because I've been keeping score, but I think that would end the fun prematurely. It's better, I think, if we all keep this debate going informally in the most important free market of all, which is, of course, the free market of ideas. We're all grateful to be living in a country where that market is not only very free, but very active, as I think we've seen it tonight. More specifically tonight, we have to be especially grateful to both teams of debaters, who did a marvelous job, to William F. Buckley, Jr. and Firing Line, to our producer, Warren Stiebel, and most especially to the University of Mississippi and its Chancellor, Gerald Turner. This is the first of the university's Hare and Hess series of lectures, and we hope they'll invite us back for more. And with that last commercial plug, in the true spirit of the evening, thanks very much for Firing Line.
Funding for this special event is provided by these grand patrons of the University of Mississippi: ENTERGY Corporation, Robert M. Herron, Leon Hess Lecture Series, and South Central Bell. Additional patron support is provided by Deposit Guarantee National Bank, Robert M. Herron Foundation, Stuart Irby Construction Company, John N. Palmer, and the University of Mississippi Foundation. Other sponsors include Andrew Jackson Life Insurance Company, Dudley Hughes, Jitney Jungle Stores, McCarty Farms Incorporated, and Trustmark National Bank.
This program was produced by SICA, which is solely responsible for its content. For a printed bound transcript of this firing line special debate, send $5 to Firing Line, Post Office Box 5966, Columbia, South Carolina,